join us for our keynote presentation to kick off our symposium. Chris is responsible for the leadership, management, and operation of the Melbourne Gardens, so he's come a long way to join us today, including he is in charge of the horticultural planning and operations, landscape architecture, provision, and development of the living plant collections, so he knows his plants, and nursery operations. He is also responsible for arboriculture and management of site facilities and infrastructure at Melbourne and Cranbourne Gardens. Chris has over 15 years experience in public and botanic gardens management. Chris will be speaking about adapting a world-renowned botanic garden to climate change, landscape succession strategy for Melbourne Gardens, which is spanning 2016 through 2036. Some of you may have seen in 2016 when Melbourne Gardens shared its landscape succession strategy, and there was quite a bit of interest, and we know that it's something we all as gardens need to be considering and planning for. Melbourne Gardens is leading the way, and we wanted to invite Chris to share more details about it. So if I could have Chris come forward.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Pam, for that wonderful introduction, and also thank you to you, Pam, individually, and the American Public Gardens Association for inviting me to present and share the work of the Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria over the past 5 years. We have been on this journey for the past 5 years, and today I will be talking about adapting a world-renowned botanical landscape to climate change, and that is our landscape succession strategy 2016 to 2036. Okay, so as Pam mentioned, we are doing some live polling. I've never done this before, so it's all new to me and it's new to the group as well, so hoping it will go well. So what I've done is put forward a very simple question, really, and that question is, does your garden's long-term planning address climate change adaptation? So now is an opportunity, before I start my presentation, for you to grab your mobile device and vote. So if you want to participate in the online polling, go to www.menti.com and use that code. The instructions are very simple, the poll is very simple, so I'll just give you a minute just to participate if you'd like to, and I'll just gauge the presence of the audience before I continue on. And cast your vote, and we'll come back to the results at the end, and hopefully that will stimulate some good discussion. And also people who are currently viewing online are also able to vote as well, so hopefully we'll get a good representation of where gardens are at in regard to planning for climate change. People still tinkering away. Is it working? Is it all good? Yeah, good. Excellent.
There's Wi-Fi and there's no password needed.
Thank you, Pam. That might help. Hopefully this will become more seamless as we go through the morning. It's always the first one, isn't it? Now you know what to do when someone says, do this. Are we all okay? Is I okay if I continue? I think most people are sort of looking up, thumbs up. That's great. Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll come back to that at the end of the presentation. Let's keep track of time. So I work for the Melbourne Gardens at the Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria. Melbourne Gardens is the physical site that I manage. Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria is the organisation that I work for. Okay, for For those of you that don't know Australia, it's a damn big country. It's pretty much as big as USA in size, so it's a huge country, sort of 3,000 kilometres from side to side. You can see Melbourne down there in the bottom right-hand corner in the state of Victoria, and the other city that you may well know is Sydney, just a bit further up the east coast. And bizarrely, neither of these places are the capital of Australia. They couldn't sort it out amongst themselves way back when, so they decided that Canberra, which is in the Australian Capital Territory, would be the capital of Australia. It looks like we're working okay. Alright, so the Melbourne Gardens is set within the Domain Parklands, which is 120 hectare parkland. Melbourne Gardens covers approximately 1/3 of that space, and you can see in the background the Melbourne Central Business District, or what you may call downtown, and also the Yarra River running through on the right hand side through the top of the gardens there. The Gardens and the Domain Parklands is the premier urban green space within Melbourne. It has a population of 5 million people in the city, set to increase to 7 million by 2030. So the city is growing at a really rapid rate, and the Gardens is becoming even more and more precious as urban development springs up around it. A slightly biased statement there, you may agree, but I've got the stand, so I'll take the liberty. I believe it is one of the most beautiful botanic garden landscapes in the world. It is a picturesque landscape with sweeping lawns, stunning lakes, and commanding views over the city. The Gardens has 165 staff. Unfortunately, I don't manage all of those. I'd love to. But that's the whole organisation, is 165 staff. I have around 45 staff, and just to give you an idea, 20 of those are on-ground horticulturists. We also have a magnificent herbarium at the Botanic Gardens, which houses 1.5 million specimens, and that is the largest herbarium collection within Australia. The Gardens were established in 1846, so just over 170 years old, and it was designed by William Guilfoyle, who was the second director of the Gardens, a very famous garden designer and director within Australia, and he was at the Gardens from 1873 to 1909. The site covers 38 hectares of intensely managed gardens. We have no wild areas, so it's all beautifully manicured. And we have around 1.6 million visitors per annum, and it is free to enter, like all Australian gardens. Children are a very big part of the Gardens. We have 25,000 school students come through the Gardens every year and attend formal lessons. And it really is about teaching our children today for tomorrow's future. We also have a world-class children's garden, the Ian Potter Foundation Children's Garden, where we have 300,000 visits per year. Moving on to the collections, we have 50,000 plants within the Gardens, 6,000 trees, 8,000 taxa, and 30 living plant collections and plants from 190 countries. And that's most of the countries in the world. And the plant collections are nestled very sympathetically within the Gardens landscape, so it reads as one garden rather than a landscape with lots of disconnected collections as some botanic gardens can be. So it really is a beautiful whole. The image that you can see on the screen there is Guilfoyle's volcano, and that is part of our working wetlands stormwater harvesting system, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And that really is part of offsetting the use of drinking water for irrigation of the Gardens by 40%. And you can also see that the surrounding plants of that feature are low water use species as well. So the changing climate. No doubt you've all seen these graphs in various guises. They're not new to any of us, and I'm certainly not here to convince you that climate change is real. My organisation and myself certainly do believe it is real, and hence the development of the strategy. So the slide in front of you is a slide from the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, highlighting the fact that global temperatures are on the rise and have been for the past 40 years. And I'm sure there are very similar graphs for areas around the world and other organisations that produce such information. And indeed, you may have seen the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report released in early October, indicating a 3 to 4 degree Celsius. I am going to try and switch to Fahrenheit when I can, because I'm aware there's a lot of people that work in the imperial measurements here. So that's sort of 6 to 8 Fahrenheit of global warming by the end of the century, so the 2100. And this is certainly something that we're working towards mitigating at the Royal Botanic Gardens. So moving on to Melbourne, the graph there on your left highlights the change in temperature and rainfall, and unfortunately the graph from my perspective is going the wrong way. The red line is temperature, so temperatures are increasing, and we can certainly see that it is on quite a fast upward trajectory for the last 30 or 40 years. And indeed, some of that temperature is a result of urban thermal mass and also the urban heat island effect, and some of it certainly is due to man-made climate change. Yeah. The figure on the right shows analogue cities for Melbourne, of what we might expect to see in 2070. So you can see Melbourne in the bottom right hand corner there, and the temperatures that we're looking at that we may well see in 2070 are cities that are 800 to 1,500 kilometres north. Obviously we're in the southern hemisphere, so north means getting hotter, and they are cities within New South Wales and Queensland. So we expect to see current day temperatures escalating to mirror those cities up there. The future climatic challenges of Melbourne are quite stark. The annual mean is set to increase by over 3 degrees Celsius, so from a current almost 16 degrees Celsius to 19. And also perhaps more damaging are the number of hot days that we're expecting to experience within Melbourne. So you see the mean days there over 40 degrees Celsius, which I think is around about 105 Fahrenheit. We're looking at going from a current number of 1.6 to 6.8, so a significant increase in those very hot days. And we found that those very hot days in Melbourne Gardens are the ones that really damage our plant collections almost to a point of no return. Also, the rainfall is due to decrease by around 10%, and more importantly that critical winter-spring rainfall to really kick off that summer growth is due to decrease by a significant margin. Okay, so on to the actual strategy for Melbourne Gardens. So this strategy is a 20-year strategy, and it was really born out of the Royal Botanic Gardens' reputation in integrated water management. From the year 2000, the Gardens had been working tirelessly on improving its response to integrated water management, and really adapting to climate change was a natural and expanded progression of this. And the organisation decided that a strategic plan was required to address a number of things. One of those obviously was future climate, but also plant selection and evaluation, ex situ plant conservation and research programs to inform management, and also integrated water management. So that is our strategy. It is available online, and I'll give you that address at the end of the slideshow. So why landscape succession? Well, to put it simply, it really is to transition the Melbourne Gardens landscape and collections to position where they are more resilient to projected change in climate. A very simple objective. And that projected climate, as I've already mentioned, is hotter and drier by the time we get to 2070. but we also want to maintain the core values of the organisation and really ensure that these gardens are here for future generations, so our children's children. And I see myself as a steward at a point in time really of these magnificent gardens, and my responsibility to make sure these gardens are here for future generations long after I've left. And it's about maintaining those educational, recreational, scientific values for those future generations. And it's important that we act now and evaluate and select our plants and understand that that requires predictive decision making. So accepting that we don't know all the answers, but doing the best we can based on the information that we have. I think it's important that I share with you how the landscape succession strategy fits within our planning framework. This is a planning framework of all strategic plans that are under my management at the Melbourne Gardens. We have a very strong planning framework, and I'd like to point out two of the most important. One is obviously the landscape succession strategy, and the other is the landscape master plan. We're currently developing our third landscape master plan. It's a 20-year master plan that will guide the direction and the development of the gardens over the next 20 years. And you'll also see a significant number of other plans up there, ranging from conservation management plan, strategic tree plans, collection plans, and biosecurity plans, and also strategic water plans. So it's fair to say that Melbourne Gardens has a very strong reputation in Botanic Gardens management and Botanic Gardens planning. And indeed the majority of these related plans now refer to the landscape succession strategy in them. And that really ensures continuity of the documents and the strategy and the way forward should key personnel leave the organisation, so there really isn't an opportunity to change direction. This is really a direction that is somewhat locked in for the long term. A lot of these plans are 5 to 20 years in duration. Just coming back to the strategy, the key challenges that we identified for Melbourne Gardens in what we wanted to respond to with the plan are there for you to see. And it really is adapting to the projected climate of significantly higher temperatures and lower rainfall. It is finding suitable plant species and making informed decisions whilst maintaining that heritage landscape character. And I should say that the Gardens does have a very strong heritage overlay. We are bound by state legislation to manage the gardens in a responsible way. So it's not about changing the character or the feel of the gardens and turning a lot of our lawns into arid areas. That will always be maintained through heritage overlays, and it's important to understand that. One of the other challenges is to manage and secure sustainable water supplies. Water is at a premium in Australia. It is the driest continent in the world, so we have a responsibility to manage that resource responsibly. We also need to respond to biosecurity threats from changing climates. Becoming hotter and drier brings its own problems. We get more pest incursions, we get different pest incursions, and you may well have heard that Australia has been gripped by the threat of myrtle rust, which is really threatening to impact a lot of our myrtaceous species. So think eucalypts, you know, an iconic Australian species is significantly under threat. Predominantly in the north of the country, it's come down to Melbourne and Victoria. We've had a few incursions in the gardens, but it is predominantly in Queensland and New South Wales. And also managing our ageing built assets. The Gardens is over 170 years old, and some of the infrastructure is also of a similar age, so not able to withstand the current pressures on it. So why are we doing this? Well, really the benefits of the landscape succession strategy are to inform the management of the living collections and the landscape. It gives us an opportunity to focus on increasing our wild provenance plant material and understanding plant tolerances and plant selection, but also an opportunity to think more broadly and to transfer valuable and susceptible plants to more suitable locations in other botanic gardens. So it's not about being precious and seeing that Melbourne Gardens has to have one of each species. It's about understanding what other botanic gardens can we partner with and actually transfer these susceptible species to them. We also need to bear in mind the growing population, as I've already alluded to. We are looking to increase visitation in the next 20 years by 0.9 million, so that's from 1.6 to 2.5 million. And as Melbourne continues to grow, the pressure on the gardens continues to increase. Of course, we want to enhance human well-being. There's a plethora of research out there to show that green spaces really do help people with social, mental and physical health, and we want to be part of that. Also, environmental cooling. Irrigated landscapes do assist with cooling the surrounds. It has been shown in Melbourne Gardens that we are up to from 2 to 6 degrees Celsius cooler than the neighbouring city of Melbourne. That's the urban area of Melbourne, the CBD. So we can just show that we as a garden, an irrigated landscape, can really provide that wonderful benefit. We'll also be looking to provide a more resilient and sustainable landscape and reduce resources such as water. Education and learning is also a critical part and a significant benefit of the landscape succession strategy. And what this strategy really allows us to do is to share the information within it, and for other botanic gardens to use this as a framework and a blueprint, if you like, for botanical and urban landscapes, and also improving community understanding. Onto the strategy itself. We have 5 strategies, 5 targets and 25 actions. Each strategy has 1 primary target and 5 actions. So strategy 1 and this is the strategy that we'll focus on most during the presentation today, and probably the one that is most relevant to the audience. And that is actively manage the transition of the Melbourne Gardens landscape and plant collections. So we've set ourselves a target that by 2036, so that's 20 years away, to have 75% of the taxa in the garden suitable for the projected climate of 2070. Strategy 2 is to establish a mixed age selection of plants composed of high diversity of taxa. And just for information, our current tree population, which is quite mature, is actually 68% mature, 14% juvenile and 18% semi-mature. We are looking to transition that to have a more even mix to 20% juvenile, 50% semi-mature and 30% mature. So we've got an awful lot of work to do. And by 2036 we'll be looking to ensure that plant diversity is equal or greater to 8,400 distinct taxa of mixed age, which is critical from a tree perspective, with greater than 35% wild provenance source plants. Currently the gardens only has 17.4% wild provenance source plants, so again we've got significant work to do in that space. Strategy 3 is to maximise sustainable water use and supply security. By 2020 the gardens are looking to have 100% of its landscape irrigation needs provided by sustainable water supplies. And that's not only about securing those water supplies, but it's also about increasing the number of taxa and areas requiring less supplementary irrigation whilst maintaining that overall heritage landscape style. And to that end we're also managing our existing irrigation system, which is 25 years old, so the whole site is currently irrigated, and we're undertaking a current audit of that to understand its useful life expectancy. I just thought I'd share with you a bit more detail on our work in wetland systems. This is a system that I mentioned earlier, where we've been able to offset the use of drinking water for irrigating our landscapes by 40%. And this is basically where we're bringing water in off the streets and we're capturing that water and filtering it into our lake system, which is about a 4-hectare area of our gardens, which is 38 hectares. So we're bringing water in off the streets in 2 locations. We're bringing it through gross pollutant traps, through sediment ponds and through filtered wetlands, and that then is basically stored within our lake system. We can then pump that water into our irrigation treatment centre for use out onto the landscape, and we're able to use around about 55 to 60 million litres of water through this system. On the whole, we use 130 million litres of water to irrigate the gardens at the cost of almost $400,000 a year. So becoming non-reliant on potable water is a big driver for us, and it's also a great educational opportunity as well to promote sustainable ways of managing a green landscape. The next stage that we're looking at is to draw water from the adjacent Yarra River, which is at the top of the screen up there, and that will give us the extra 60% of water. That water is currently saline, so we are moving upstream significantly to an area where it is less saline. We'll have a small desal plant and we'll basically pump the water into the lake system to basically turn on and off the tap, as it were, to be able to top up our ornamental lake. The one flaw with our current system that we have at the moment is it relies on rainfall, so if it doesn't rain, the lake doesn't get recharged. We draw down for landscape use, and then the lake can get to quite low levels, so there are only certain times of the year that we can use it, and it really does depend on a reliable rainfall supply. Strategy 4 is to maximise the benefits of green space and built environment through landscape design. So we're very fortunate in the Melbourne Gardens to have a landscape architect on board who reports to me, and I work very closely with that individual to make sure that the new spaces that we're designing really do support health and well-being, and also respond to the future climate as well. So that's just as simple as creating more shade, creating more spaces for people to have quiet time and escape the urban noise. And to that end, we're constructing health and well-being spaces within an area known as Fern Gully, where people can go and meditate or contemplate life. And we're also designing a sensory garden as well. And through this, some of the elements that aren't obvious to the visitors is to improve facilities such as stormwater and irrigation systems. And the final strategy is to improve the understanding of the impacts of climate change on botanical landscapes. And that's really where we're preparing and delivering programs to raise awareness of climate change impacts and also showcase the Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria's initiatives. We're doing this at a regional level as well. So by 1870 there were 20 regional botanic gardens within the state of Victoria alone. It's fair to say that a number of those regional botanic gardens and often poorly resourced botanic gardens will be facing similar climate challenges to what Melbourne Gardens are facing today. So it's an opportunity for us to use our plan as a way to guide their development and their response to climate change. And on a more global level, we're entering into a really exciting phase with something that's called a Climate Change Alliance. And that alliance is where we're planning to invite up to 13 botanical organisations to Melbourne Gardens in December for a climate change summit to really discuss and promote the issues on climate change and how we can all work together to respond to it and adapt to it going forwards. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So I just want to touch on a couple of the research projects that we've been undertaking for living collections development within Melbourne Gardens. And I should say that a lot of this work has been undertaken in conjunction with Melbourne University. The first of those projects is the Climate Change Risk Assessment of Living Collections, which really explores the vulnerability of species in the collection of the Melbourne Gardens to different climate change scenarios. The assessment compares the temperature of locations where each species naturally occur and are known to be cultivated with current and projected climates. So we've applied past temperatures, urban heat island influences, and modelling. That is the representation and concentration pathways, climate scenarios. And we have picked the worst case scenario, the 8.5 representation concentration pathway in doing this work. So we've used two significant data sets to undertake this work. The first one is World CLIM, which gives monthly data for minimum, mean and maximum temperature, and this is all available online, so it's readily available. It's all free to use. And we've also used the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which is GBIF, which has millions and millions of plant occurrences where they occur around the world, not just plants, animals as well, so you have to do a little bit of filtering work on that. So we've used those two data sets that are available online, and we've incorporated the spatial layers from World CLIM and the GBIF occurrences, and also we've been able to attain 400 urban plant inventories to generate temperature niches for 6,103 taxa out of our 8,000 that we currently have within the gardens, or 76% we've been able to assess. We've chosen the mean annual temperature as the primary variable, as this is considered a strong predictor for natural and urban plant distribution. And the temperature niches that we derived were plus or minus 5 degrees, so giving that sort of tolerance at either side of the median value. So we assessed the 8,007 taxa in the gardens. We were only able to assess 6,000 of those. There are only records that existed for 6,000 of those, so that's 76%. And of those 76%, the good news is that 70% are not considered vulnerable in our current climate, but worryingly 12% are considered vulnerable. If we fast forward to 2070, you will see that the picture becomes certainly more dire. In 2070, only 41% are suitable for the future climate, and an alarming 26% are not suitable. So you can see that there's a fair bit of work to do. We're looking to get up to that sort of 75% mark by 2036 that will be suitable for the future climate. So quite startling figures there, and quite sobering figures. And we've worked out that on average we'll need to bring in 100 new taxa into the gardens to meet that 75% target. Another way of representing that data is with our tree collection. These are all the trees within the gardens. Remember, we've got 6,000 trees within the Melbourne Gardens. We've got just over 1,273 taxa, and through this work we were able to assess 87% of those, so 1,110 tree taxa were assessed. You will see that the green dots on there represent trees that are okay, and they're good to go. The red trees are those that are under threat and are vulnerable within the current climate. The purple ones are showing where it's actually deemed too cold within Melbourne Gardens for those species to grow. So things are only going to get better for those species, really. So that's the current climate, so just keep that in mind, and I'll just fast forward to 2070, and you can see we get a lot more red, orange and yellow. That's back to the current climate. Fast forward to 2070, and again the results are very sobering, and it really helps us in regards to our tree management. And when this is overlaid with the safe, useful life expectancy data that we have on all our 6,000 trees, it starts to build up a very powerful picture and informs management of how we can undertake strategic tree removals within the landscape. You probably all know that taking out a live tree in any gardens is a difficult task. There are often very emotive subjects. People get attached to trees, and it's not just visitors that get attached to trees, staff do as well. So really being able to provide data and a bit of science behind why we're taking out certain trees for the good of the gardens in a long-term perspective really helps sort of communicate that response. The second project I'd like to share with you, it really builds on the work of the previous assessment by identifying threatened plant species that could be suitable for adding to the living collection at Melbourne. Again, this has been undertaken in conjunction with the University of Melbourne. This is really about understanding what plants can we actually grow in Melbourne that we don't currently have. So we reviewed 20,200 threatened plants from various lists around the world, and they range from global IUCN red lists, national lists, which is our EPBC, and also the Fauna and Flora Guarantee Act of Victoria. So a whole range of lists, global, national and regional. We were able to assess over 12,000 taxa, so that's 60% of those 20,000, and we found that there are 2,900 taxa that are green flagged under the worst case scenario. So that's 2,900 taxa that we currently don't have that would be suitable for growing in Melbourne Gardens in a worst climate scenario of 2070. Alarmingly, we found during this process that 47% of the 635 threatened species that we currently have in Melbourne Gardens are identified as high risk in future climate scenarios. So that really provides a red flag for us to sort of transition those plants out of the landscape and find new homes for them. I'll just go on to a few tools and techniques for living collections development, and these are things that are sort of more used at the grassroots level by our curators and our horticulturists. An interesting map here is a combined map of mean annual precipitation and mean annual temperature. So mean annual precipitation between 200 and 1,000 millimetres, and the temperature between 17 and 20 degrees C. And that's the sort of envelope that we're looking for in Melbourne Gardens. The blue is precipitation, and the red, yellow and green is the temperature. And these are GIS raster files available on WorldClim, again available free for you to choose, and you can put your own parameters in depending on your prevailing climate, and you can start to understand what analogous cities you may have around the world. So for example, Melbourne is very akin to Perth in Western Australia, and also South Africa, and also Buenos Aires in Argentina, and also some cities within Mexico as well. So where those values intersect starts to highlight areas in the world which we can target for plant collecting, and that is to bring plants into the gardens that we know with some confidence will be suitable for the future climate of 2070. And as you can see, there's not an awful lot of area there. We've got some area in the southern US and northern Mexico. We've got Argentina, southern Africa, quite a lot of Australia, no surprise there, and a bit of North Africa. So not an awful lot of choice for us in terms of where to target our plant collections. And that broken down a little bit further, that's the top 20 countries that are the best climate match for Melbourne Gardens. And there's a total of 68 countries that were found to be climate matched, but they're the ones in order of largest area. So no surprise that Australia is top of the list, but you know, you start to sort of read through that list of countries, and they're countries that sort of feel right in terms of, yes, that has a similar climate to what Melbourne will have in the future. Going on to the Living Collections database, we've developed again some tools for our horticulturists and curators. And this is a propagation request form. So when our staff go to put in our propagation request through our Living Collections database, we basically wave a red flag in front of them and say, have you checked the climate suitability of this plant before propagating it, rather than just blindly propagating it. Yes, I think it'll be okay. We actually want to test that. So the work that we've done on the research projects has been inputted into the Living Collections database, and you can see those three bands there. So you've got a current risk in terms of climate, so it's an orange risk, so not too bad, and then a moderate risk of the 2050 climate scenario, and then the extreme risk of 2070. So that's obviously coming up as a red flag, and that's just a simple species such as Quercus roba. And we also put some guidance notes with those indicators. So it really describes, what those colours mean. So for someone who's not using this frequently, we felt it was important to explain what those indicators really mean, and also some cultivating notes, and also some points for individual curators to consider. So if it's a red flag species, they should avoid propagation for growing in Melbourne Gardens unless approved by the curator of horticulture. So it really sort of means that they have to sort of take it up a level. And also an opportunity to prioritise successive removal of these species and replacement of these taxa with better climate suited wild provenance alternatives. And if we do want to propagate this plant, then we need to consider where it might grow if it is red flagged in another botanic garden. So once they've gone through all of this, we put up a bit of a disclaimer. We haven't tested this yet in the field, so this is all very new, so we're not quite sure how this is going to go down. But we feel as though it's a good step forward. And our staff have been part of developing these tools anyway, so these are the things that they want to use. They want this information at their fingertips. Another report that we have just developed is a climate risk assessment report, again within our living collections database, so an individual horticulturist can go there and they can review any group of plants from our database and get an instant overview of its climate suitability, and that is short, mid or long term. So you may say, I want to see all red flagged oaks on oak lawn at 2070, and you put in those parameters and it spits out a report, and there you can see all red flagged oaks at 2070. It also gives you the indicators of the climate, the current climate, and also the 2050 climate as well. Another tool that we're just in the development of is a plant selection tool, and that really is a tool to conduct a risk assessment for current or new species to be planted at Melbourne Gardens. And that's basically where a landscape architect or an individual horticulturist could develop a plant list, put it into this system, and then basically get a report in terms of the climate suitability of each individual plant species, both current, medium term and 2070. And you can see on the right hand side the medians of temperature and precipitation there as well. So moving on to further implementation, these are just some snapshots of other things that we've been doing. So we have secured funding for the final stage of our sustainable irrigation water project, and that's bringing water from the Yarra River into the gardens via a small desal plant. That's a project that's going to cost around about $6.5 million, and that will mean that we're totally non-reliant on drinking water for irrigating our landscape. We have been mapping and IDing all 6,000 trees for the first time since 1992, and it's taken us 3 to 4 years to do that, so a significant effort by our in-house team. We've also undertaken a useful life expectancy assessment of all trees in the gardens, and that's really to provide another layer really to this climate information in terms of how healthy these trees are. So if you've got a tree that is only 1 to 5 years in terms of its useful life expectancy, and it's got a red flag, it gives us an easy option to undertake a strategic tree removal and also plant future climate suitable replacements. We've partnered with quite a few regional botanic gardens to duplicate and transfer susceptible wild collected taxa to other gardens, and that's been working really well. And we've also been trialling something we've termed as winter-spring water banking, and that's really irrigating the landscape when you really wouldn't think to. And that is in the winter when we often have surplus rainfall, we have surplus water in our lake system, and we basically pump that water onto our landscape to get some deep watering down to our older trees, and we're able to monitor that. We have soil moisture sensors across the gardens at various locations which can really determine the moisture levels from 0.8 to 4 meters through the soil profile, and we can understand if an area is particularly dry at 3 meters, for example, and we can apply irrigation to that area. And as it says there, we can store up to 155 million litres of water in that profile throughout the winter. And then when summer comes, the trees are able then to draw on that reservoir of water. We've also been understanding the microclimates across the 19 locations within Melbourne Gardens, and that's looking at niches within the Botanic Gardens where we can help some of these more susceptible species, and indeed enhance some of these more suitable microclimates to become even more suitable, so we can continue to grow these wonderful plants and the ones that we really do want to keep and really do treasure. We've also invested heavily in staff scholarships to other Botanic Gardens to expand networks and identify suitable future taxa. We've also been sharing the strategy broadly. I understand that you did receive the strategy back in 2016, courtesy of my colleague Peter Symes, who has worked with me on this project for the last 5 years. We've also had close links with Mary Burke, who's in the audience of UC Davis, and also Cornell Botanic Garden in New York. We've also been presenting internationally at the Urban Horticulture Conference in Athens. I was at the Global Botanic Gardens Congress in Geneva last year, where I met Pam, and she asked me to come and speak to you today, and also nationally at the Botanic Gardens Association of New Zealand Congress in Adelaide, and of course here today. And we also present quite widely back at home in the state of Victoria to local governments and other regional botanic gardens. So the word is certainly getting out there. So moving forwards, what's in the pipeline for us? We'll be looking to implement the recommendations from the climate risk assessments. We'll be evaluating our living collections and continuing to develop tools within the living collections database. We're currently renewing and reviewing our living collections strategy, which is the overarching document for managing our living collections, and we are actually looking to discontinue a number of collections in response to this recent work, but it also creates a great opportunity for us to introduce new collections as well of suitable taxa. So it's not all bad news. And to build on the current understanding through on-site investigation, observations, and post-grad student research. We have a lot of students come in from Melbourne Uni wanting a site to undertake applied science and actual research, and we're only too happy to work with them to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll be looking to activate the Climate Change Alliance with a summit from the 3rd to the 6th of December in 2018. And this is an opportunity that was really brought out from my attendance at the Global Botanic Gardens Congress in Geneva last year. My boss Tim Entwistle and myself realised that not many other botanic gardens were heading in this direction. Indeed, even the BGCI and the IABG, the International Association of Botanic Gardens, the two peak bodies across the world, weren't even progressed in this space at that point in time. So we saw it as an opportunity to take leadership and also to really share the work that we have done so far, and acknowledging the fact that we don't have all the answers, and wanting to bring like-minded organisations together, and indeed organisations that had started to think about climate change and how it may impact their gardens. So we selected a very broad group, a very select group, a very small group of individual organisations, which you can see there. And some of these organisations have current climates that will or are similar to the future climate of Melbourne as well. So I'm delighted to say that all the participants that were invited to attend this alliance have accepted, and we're currently in the busy planning stages to make sure that that summit is an absolute success. It won't be a traditional conference per se where we've got people speaking. It will be facilitated. The participants will be expected to work very hard, and we will be looking for those individuals to really go back to their geographical area and start putting out their feelers and building their own networks to help sort of strengthen the alliance. And this is all building towards Melbourne hosting the 7th Global Botanic Gardens Congress in 2021, which I hope some of you will be able to attend. So you might ask, what can your garden do? It may seem daunting. We've been on this journey for 5 years. I think the important thing is to do something and understand what is coming. Shift your mindset, if you haven't already, from a historical to a predictive mindset and practice, and understand what future climate your garden is facing, and that can be done very, very simply indeed. One of the things that we spent an awful lot of time on when we started on this journey was to get our plant records in order, and it's fair to say that when I arrived at the gardens some 9 years ago, our plant records weren't in a good shape. Our living collections database didn't match the plants that we had in the ground, in the landscape, and I'm sure that's not an unfamiliar point I'm making there. But it's really critical that you have trust and you're confident in your plant records to enable a lot of this research work to be undertaken, because a lot of it does rely on that data that you have in your living collections database, and also matching it to the plants in the ground. To think about developing a plan, you can use our strategy as a framework. It may not well be relevant, all parts of it, but some parts of it certainly will. And then think about assessing the future climate suitability of your collection. So understand what plants you have, and how suitable will these plants be in 2070 or 2090, or as long as you want to look into the future really. And also start prioritising those low risk species for the future climate, so putting more emphasis on them. And really it's just about understanding that the learning journey has only just begun. We certainly don't have all the answers yet, but we feel as though we're making great strides, and we're forging new ground really, and we're very happy to help you along your way should you wish to choose this path. So just some further reading and to wrap up, nearly out of time. So do have a look at our website. The strategy is on the website. Just search on landscape succession strategy and plants on landscape, and it's all there for you. There's also information on the 2 projects I talked about on our website, and also some information on the Climate Change Alliance as well. So this is the interesting bit, I guess. Yeah, that's pretty weird. Oh, there we go. Wow. So, does your garden's long-term planning address climate change adaptation? Well, it's fair to say there's a fair bit of work to do, but hopefully what you've learnt in the last half an hour or so will help you on your way. It's quite fascinating, and I think it's worked. It's fantastic. So, so thank you all for participating in the online poll. It's fair to say that there is a fair bit of work to do, but I am more than happy, and my organisation is more than happy to answer any questions that you may have in regard to the planning for climate change adaptation. There in the end. So if you do want to contact me, that's my details there. Please feel free to drop me an email, and me and my team will only be too happy to help and support you on your journey. It's a really wild ride, and I encourage you to get on board. Thank you very much. I'm just sorry for all the technical issues as well. It was a bit clunky at times, but I think we got there in the end.
No worries, no worries. We have about 5 minutes for any questions for Chris. We have Cindy Newlander, who has a microphone For those of you in the house with a question, if you'd raise your hand and then use the mic so everyone as well as the online audience can hear. And then for those of you who are joining us online, Christina Salvador here in the front will be taking your questions. There's an email process that you should be seeing on your screen. Just go ahead and shoot her the question. And we're trialing this part too, and Christina will be your voice for that question, with Chris providing the answers, all in 5 minutes. Okay. So our questions, anybody with a question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, where are you going to place the plants that are currently adapted but require cooler and moisture temperatures in the future?
Require cooler.
So they're adapted now, but in the future they're not going to be adapted. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's where we're partnering with other botanic gardens within the state of Victoria. So we have quite a few mountainous botanic gardens within the state of Victoria, and we've already started transferring plant material to those botanic gardens. So it's a great opportunity for us to be able to ensure that the plant material continues to grow and thrive, but not necessarily within the Melbourne Gardens.
Amazing work in adaptation. Question, do you have plans and strategies also addressing mitigation?
We don't have plans and strategies. We feel as though climate change is coming, and there's not an awful lot that the Melbourne Gardens itself can do about that. So we're really about adaptation and understanding that the risk is very real. And indeed, when you look at the strategy, you will see that a lot of the information relates to 2090. Well, 2070 is now looking what 2090 was only a few years ago. So it's not about mitigating from a Melbourne Gardens perspective, it's about adapting to what's coming. If we're able to mitigate, then great, but the signs aren't there at the moment.
Just curious, with rainfall predicting to be lessened with climate change scenarios, how do you justify all the efforts going into capturing rainfall to be your main water source for the future? Just curious this is something you need to justify.
Yeah, as I said, the Work in Wetlands program that I showed there, it does have one major flaw, in fact, that if it doesn't rain, then it doesn't work. Basically, we run out of stored water, which is why we're looking to take water out of the Yarra River. We have a license to extract water out of the Yarra River without impacting the environmental flow. So we will be told on a daily basis how much water we can take out of the Yarra River to basically irrigate the landscapes. So I see that last phase of the water project really being the primary source of irrigation for our gardens and not relying on rainfall.
So we all know that resources are finite, and I'm talking about brain power and money, of course. How did you come to the decisions you made to take resources away from other things, other endeavors, and putting them toward this crucial plan? And also, what are those other endeavors that fell by the wayside?
Yeah, sure. We had a restructure for a start. No, seriously. As I mentioned, the Botanic Gardens has had a very strong reputation in integrated water management for the past 15 years, and we have focused pretty much solely on that. And we've shifted our focus away from that because we believe we have done an awful lot of great work in that space and got it to a point which we're pretty happy with. So we have shifted the brain power, if you like, from that space into the climate change adaptation space. And it's really an opportunity for our individual staff members to learn and grow as well and develop their skills and become interested in an area that we're really facing now. So the greatest need is certainly in this climate change space for us. We feel as though we've got a lot of the bases covered with our irrigation management processes. So we've just shifted focus basically, but we still incorporate integrated water management into this, but it's just not as big a focus as what it once was because we've solved a lot of the issues that we had.